and to have this opportunity to talk. So I just want to amplify, I'm sure, what has already been said across the span of this week to talk about this very critical title, and it's resonant, and it's beautiful. And I like how visually the notion of being heard is represented, right? Making is in one font, race is in another font, and heard is in another font. Let's give love to the visual representation. Give love to that. Because every word is important. Because race ain't just falling out of the sky, it's made. We make race. Race is a production, not of Steven Spielberg or Darryl Zanuck. It is a production of American culture and society, in this case, but global culture and global society and history. Race is made, which means that it is something that we both inherit and distribute. It is something that we go about fashioning, that the meanings of race are not automatically absorbed in the culture, that race, as we have grown accustomed to saying in our jargon-ridden academic discourse, is a social construction. And what we mean by that is that you ain't just born with an inherent sense of what race means. It has to be something imposed on you, something shared with you, something suggested in the society that suffuses the atmosphere, that penetrates your conscious and unconscious mind. Race is manufactured like automobiles on the line in Detroit. Everybody got their role, like Motown. Barry Gordy looked at the automobile industry and therefore produced Motown Records, and the whole notion was that everybody played a part and role. And so in the making of race, there are different constitutive elements that constitute the whole, and yet it's a complicated interaction between producer and constructor and recipient and agent. Race is made. That means ain't nobody just born with a sense of what it means to be black or white or brown or red or yellow in America, because we know that one of the things you want to do is deconstruct the binaristic thinking of race, black versus white. We already know it was deeper than that. Right? We don't often acknowledge it, and if you live in certain places, you got to acknowledge it. If you're living out on the coast somewhere, if you're living in Florida or Texas, you got to acknowledge that black, brown, red, yellow, white, all of that stuff is more complicated. Or in the Pacific Rim, out in California, where Latino and Asian people become much more prominent in the discussion about race. And yet we know color is universal even in multiple discussions of race. Right? Because if Elian Gonzalez had been from, I don't know, Havana, maybe Santiago de Cuba, where the black people are, the darker black Cubans, they'd have gave him a snicker and told him, take your butt back home. If y'all remember that. There's a difference between a white Cuban and a black Dominican, even in brown realities. Because skin tone and shade and color begin to refract the prism through which we constitute and interpret conceptions of race. So while we got to get beyond the black-white binarism, because race is constituted by multiple and powerful centers around which it pivots, color still just gets funky as it is and has ever been. Because we tend to like light and don't like dark. That's universal. Now we can romanticize and fetishize dark. We like dark chocolate. Right? We construct darkness as the apotheosis of some kind of preternatural inclination to be savage and sensual. Hence, the black beast rising up out of the jungles of Africa or on the slave block in America, satisfying psychosexual dynamics. Black men used to be hung for looking at women of other races, especially white women, and now well put together together brothers have an unlimited access to the erotic property of white female identity.
Oh my.
I'm going to leave that abstract. Shout out to Chris Humphries. But what's interesting, right? Because the beauty of interracial relationships is that it challenges the hegemonic, dominant notion of what's beautiful, what's desirable, what we want. And it makes everybody on the outside nervous. Black and white and red and brown. Choose! But race is made. Literally in the interconnections and interrelationships developed between multiple races and within the context of races themselves. We know that races are socially constructed. They're not biologically determined by heritable characteristics that can be asserted on an empirical chart. Yeah, you can do that, but that ain't mean nothing. Because at the end of the day, race is constructed in societies where race makes a difference, where it begins to matter. You can tell the cab driver, look, race is a social construct. Please don't pass me by. I am but a projection of your fears, a figment of your imagination. Sorry, sir. Catch the next one. So all your racial construction ain't got nothing to do with the real world, where race continues to signify in crude and reductionistic fashion. And so the construction, the creation, the production, the manufacturing of race is critical because it is a rebuke to those of us who have settled and lethargic conceptions of race, senses of race that don't interrogate the profound diversity, complexity, and heterogeneity of race, and how race ain't something that just we understand inherently and implicitly, though that too, but we got to constantly negotiate and renegotiate our understanding. So making is important, and heard is important. I'll come back to race. And not making race heard, H-E-R-D, which is what often we do. My herd, my clan, my group, my tribe, my peeps. Part of the viciousness of race is that our herd, our group, our geography, our clan, our ethnicity, our socially organized group, our status depends upon the rabid and radical identification exclusively and nearly primarily with those who look, touch, talk, and smell like I do. I'm comfortable with folk from my hood, from my place, from my origin, from my civilization, from my worldview, from my Weltanschauung, from my perspective in life. And so, making race a herd organized around tribal deities erected from iconographic figures within your herd, your group, your place. You think the world operates best according to your group. So Newt Gingrich could say, like he did today, that, we ought to get rid of the poor laws, work laws for kids, and that young people and poor young people in particular ain't got no habits of working, and that's the problem. Therefore, throw all the janitors out and then hire the poor working students and other poor people. That's just called the extension of exploitation. Only read Marx. For that matter, read my grandma or read your grandma. Read the comments in the local paper. Read Barbara Ehrenreich, Nickel and Dime. Read the theorist on poverty, Mr. Gingrich, who is renowned ostensibly as an intellectual. What stuff you be reading? Because it's one thing to say, yes, it is true that people who are deprived of jobs don't develop significant habits of going to work because they ain't got no job. Give them a job, news. But when your tribe begins to be the organizing principle and logic around which other data is arrayed. And your experience is so insular and damn near fascist. It imposes constraints because you refuse to see outside of your own box, your own tribe, your own herd. Then you begin to normalize your particular as the universal. And see, that's the seductive property of whiteness in general. That the genius of whiteness is it makes something that's real, particular, and local look universal, and therefore gets rendered invisible. That's why when many white brothers and sisters are offended when people of color and others begin to speak about race, why are you obsessed with race? Jiminy Christmas, just enough already. And brother, you know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. No, we don't know what you're saying. So what you're saying? Sorry, that's the EPMD shout out. Old school hip hop 90s. So what's interesting then is that whiteness is rendered universal when it's really particular. And the ingenuity of white supremacy, more broadly, is that it is able to present itself as exhaustive and representative of the entire. And that when anything else comes along to challenge that, it begins to challenge it as lethally local, obscuringly particular, and dissenting from the mainstream view that we should all come together. But you developing consensus out of coercion is different than saying let everybody speak. Because when everybody speak, it gets funky. Democracy is a funky process. Fascism is neat. Hierarchy is well established. But when you got democracy, everybody be talking and you don't necessarily be wanting to hear what the hell they got to say. But that's what democracy is about. Trying to get as broad a take on a critical set of values and institutions and visions and imaginings as possible. And so herds, tribes, and tribal deities and icons that rise up out of the ground of the particular, who make themselves universal, who drape themselves in the universal. If the universal was really universal, we would just take the notion that all men and women are created equal. But it didn't say women, it said all men. Already it ain't universal. Half the human beings ain't even included. Don't even speak about children. All men. What about the sisters? What about the ladies? What about the women? Oh no, you see, men is universal. It means all humankind. Right! The particular has been universalized, but it's still particular. Right. Gender oppression for hundreds of years has been transmitted through a virus of ostensible and alleged universality when it's always been lethally local and particular, but it made it look like it was universal. And hence, when the other people come along to challenge the alleged universality and show that it's just a charade, they get dogged. Why do people keep talking about it? Because then we get the burden to bear. It's our fault for showing that it's a lie. Sorry, the emperor has many clothes. And he changes them at his discretion. And so if the universal was already universal, it wouldn't be a need for anything else to challenge it, but the universal ain't really never universal. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Slaves weren't involved in that. Indentured servants at a certain level weren't involved in that, except that they were of a certain color and hue and pedigree. So my brothers and sisters, from the get-go, the notion of the universal was already problematized. Herd, our herd, and it could look like a good herd. It could be Eurocentrism. It could be Thomas Jefferson in the Monticello writing the Declaration of Independence. He was a genius, no doubt about it. Dude said, let me write the Declaration of Independence. I don't need no redactors, no editors. It's good. That's Jay-Z. First take. It's done. Just blaze. Me and you. God forgive me for my brash delivery, but I remember vividly what these streets did to me. First take, done. Well, Mr. Jefferson, we might have to add a few words and take a few things out. He was a great man. His notion of democracy was expansive. But at the same time, y'all, it's still not universal, although it's parading that way. Herd, tribe. Even though it's a beautiful tribe and a beautiful herd, it's still a herd. It's still narrative. It's still narrow. It's still limited. It's still circumscribed. Because he's even denying the legitimacy of black identity in that black-white binarism. He writes notes on Virginia. You ever read that book? Fascinating. Negroes lack rational skill and reason. That's at daytime. But at night, he pulled out some Luther Vandross tapes. Don't you remember? I told you I loved you, Sally. Baby, 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 ooh, baby, baby. He got some, let's go back old school. Let me see. Brother Baldwin, let's get to some. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. Mustang Sally Hemmings. What his logic couldn't see, his loins had the second. Socially constructed, deeply inscribed upon erotic and existential practices, and dadgummit, he's saying one thing with his mind. It's an R. Kelly dilemma. Mouth saying no, but my body. Y'all forgive me for the R. Kelly reference. Speaking of R. Kelly, he and Mr. Jefferson may have had more in common than we realize. Sally Hemings was 14. I know you say, how dare you compare R. Kelly and Thomas Jefferson? You're right, heard. Because Mr. Jefferson has never wrote, "Step in the Name of Love." And I know. So my point simply is this: the universal has to be nuanced, has to be seen as what it is, a cloak for the assertion of a privilege of the local to assume representational authority over others, representative status. The very local becomes representative and exhaustive for everybody, so everybody else's voices get closed out. So they can't be heard. They can't be amplified. They can't be felt. The words don't ring as powerfully because now they have been obscured. And in the middle of that race, how do we understand it? Why do we talk about it? Aren't we living, after all, in a post-racial era? One brother in public housing in D.C. cannot erase the race problem. Now, it's great public housing. If a black man gonna live in public housing, might as well be 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Speak on it.
Did we really think that the election of Barack Obama could usher in a post-racial era? Mr. Obama himself challenged that notion in his second book. He said, it just strikes me as funny when people use me as an example of post-racial. It was a Mike Tyson moment. It's ludicrous. Race is the amalgamation of a variety of contested and contesting identities and ideas. A knot, a powerful spherical, if you will, or if you shift metaphors or shapes, triangular, even rectangular. Whatever our geometric imagination can conjure, a Buckminster Fuller-like geodesic dome of ever-evolving and concentrated power. Race is complicated, and the idea of race is so tremendously productive and controversial because it has been produced and manufactured to privilege